I'm Laurie Cardoza Moore, and this is Focus on Israel. About the anti-Semitic opera glorifying Palestinian terrorists that recently played at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City? Hello, and welcome to this edition of Focus on Israel. I'm Laurie Cardoza Moore, and in 2005, I founded Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and sharing the message of Christian biblical responsibility to the people and land of Israel. The ongoing and evolving war against Israel has taken multiple phases. The first phase was direct warfare. The second, terrorism. Terrorists have targeted Israelis both at home and abroad, from the massacre of Israeli athletes at Munich to the Second Intifada, to the murder of a crippled Jewish man, Leon Klinghoffer. Israel and the Jewish people have not been deterred, only strengthened in their resolve. But the anti-Semites and Israel haters continue to find a new scheme. We now see a soft war, a new anti-Semitism that seeks to isolate Israel by delegitimizing it through the media, the arts, as well as through boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. There are many people waging this war. Some blow up cafes, some fire rockets into civilian areas. Some are pursuing nuclear arms, and some through propagandist art, such as this controversial anti-Semitic opera. This battleground is everywhere, but the most far-reaching is the media and the arts. Anti-Semitic artists have taken a page from the masters of Jew hatred and propaganda, the Nazis. They knew how to use propaganda in the arts to appeal to the hearts of the masses. It is hard to believe that the Metropolitan Opera has taken a page from their book. The people behind this opera have aligned themselves with the terrorists, with the BDS camp, with anti-Semites around the world. They are adding fuel to a fire to destroy Israel. This so-called opera will only embolden our enemies and Israel's enemies. We must never stand for the glorification of terror under the shield of free speech. Hate speech is not free speech. Back in 2002, the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, put it this way: where anti-Semitism and views that are profoundly anti-Israeli have traditionally been the primary preserve of poorly educated right-wing populists, profoundly anti-Israel views are increasingly finding support in progressive intellectual communities. Serious and thoughtful people are advocating and taking actions that are anti-Semitic in their effect, if not their intent. Far from being dismissed out of hand, anti-Semitism today enjoys support at both the highest and lowest reaches of society. Still, it seems very disturbing to see that anti-Semitism has found a new home in polite society, a world-famous New York Opera Theater. The opera purports to depict the brutal 1985 murder of Leon Klinghoffer, the disabled Jewish American tourist who was shot and dumped into the sea by members of the PLO. Terrorists hijacked the cruise ship on which he and his wife were taking a special trip to Israel for their 36th wedding anniversary. But instead of showing the brutal killing of a defenseless old man by terrorists, the opera takes a strange turn, positing both Leon Klinghoffer and his murderers as moral equivalents, each representing an equally valid worldview. It opens with the wholly invented scene of Jews brutally killing defenseless Palestinian women. Jews are depicted as bloodthirsty and venal, willing to exploit others for their own gain. In contrast, the PLO terrorists who killed Klinghoffer are portrayed as more complex and even noble, singing at one point, "We are soldiers fighting a war. We are not criminals. We are not vandals. We are men of ideals." The Death of Klinghoffer was written by American composer John Adams and Alice Goodman. Both artists clearly had strong agendas as they worked on the piece. One of Mr. Adams' aims in writing the opera was to teach Americans to be more nuanced in their approach to terrorism. He wanted to teach audiences that terrorism could be understood instead of condemned. Given its offensive nature, The Death of Klinghoffer has rarely been performed. After its 1991 debut, opera companies the world over avoided it like the plague. We have to ask, why would the Met perform this toxic work? The Death of Klinghoffer isn't an abstract piece of theater. It goes a long way toward excusing the murder of a helpless American Jew, and its performance today runs the very real risk of exacerbating Jew hatred around the world. Ilsa and Lisa Klinghoffer, Leon Klinghoffer's daughters, explained the opera's dangers. The Death of Klinghoffer rationalizes, romanticizes, and legitimizes the terrorist murder of our father.
After a 72-hour siege at sea, negotiations among the PLO, Italy, and Egypt succeed in getting the Achille Lauro back to Egypt. There, the 4 terrorists surrender the ship. At first, the world is led to believe that no one is harmed, so the Palestinians are promised safe passage out of Egypt. But the next day, the truth is learned, and the U.S. ambassador to Egypt makes the announcement. The murder of a 69-year-old disabled passenger from New York City angers America. Americans are outraged when the terrorists are allowed to escape on an Egyptian plane to safe territory in Tunisia. This time, Reagan takes action.
What we want is justice done.
In a flawless execution, U.S. Navy F-14 fighter jets intercept the Egyptian airliner in midair and force it to land at a U.S. base in Sicily.
These young Americans sent a message to terrorists everywhere. The message, you can run, but you can't hide.
Italian courts convict the Palestinian hijackers. But again, the Reagan administration and the public are left dismayed when Italian authorities grant freedom to Abu al-Abbas, the man believed to be the brains behind the hijacking. Italian courts had found no direct evidence of his involvement.
Lincoln Center's Metropolitan Opera has announced that it will be producing The Death of Klinghoffer this fall, an opera which focuses on the 1985 Arab terrorist attack on Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro, where Leon Klinghoffer, a disabled senior citizen, was murdered. The opera jumps back and forth through time, spewing anti-Israel propaganda, painting an inaccurate portrait of the establishment of Israel, and putting Jews in a bad light throughout in general. Many productions depict tyrannical Jews beating and forcibly displacing the Arabs that lived there during the creation of Israel, humanizing the Achille Lauro terrorists and putting the blame for the actions of these and future terrorists squarely on the shoulders of Israelis and Jews the world over, insinuating that basically the Jews did this to themselves and they kind of deserve it. The overall message of sympathy, some might say approval, of terrorist actions from one of the largest elite cultural institutions in the entire globe both validates past violence and potentially flames further violent action in not only Israel, but the US as well, which has seen more than enough bombings and shootings in the past few years. If you'd like to help stop the Met and Lincoln Center from making a terrible mistake by celebrating a culture of barbarism, romanticizing terrorism, and spreading propaganda with its planned production of The Death of Klinghoffer, write to Peter Gelb at pgelb@medopera.org.
The Death of Klinghoffer opera had its opening performance at the Metropolitan Opera of New York on October 20th and was met with several nights of large and angry protests. Outraged New Yorkers and others from around the country came to protest the work. All supporters of Israel realize what those who back the Death of Klinghoffer do not. Moral equivalence is dangerous. It erodes our knowledge of what is good and right and enables us to rationalize the unthinkable. We must always stand and say, like the protesters at Lincoln Center, no to terror, no to moral equivalence. I was very honored to be among the many notable leaders who spoke out that day and demanded the opera be canceled.
As we proceed, I want to recognize organizations which helped put this wonderful day together. The Catholic League for Civil Rights, we'll hear from Bill Donahue shortly. Citizens Opposed to Propaganda Masquerading as Art. I'd like to now welcome a wonderful woman, a dear friend to all of us. Her name is Laurie Cardoza Moore. She's a righteous Christian who founded an organization entitled Proclaiming Justice Unto the Nations. She's an advocate for Israel, against terrorism, against moral equivalence. Please welcome Laurie Cardoza Moore.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank all of you. You know what? Give each one of you yourselves a hand for being here this afternoon. Thank you so much. I want to thank Jeffrey Wiesenfeld and all the sponsors and organizations represented here today. I'm honored to be able to stand with you to challenge my colleagues in the industry to cancel this outrageous excuse of artistic expression. Finally, I want to again thank each of you. Here we are right before the High Holy Days, and I know every one of you is busy with things to do. But the fact that you took the time to come out today, to take a stand, to let your voice be heard is so critically important at this hour. My name is Laurie Cardoza Moore. I'm a special envoy to the United Nations for the World Council of Independent Christian Churches, which has over 44 million congregants around the world. I also serve as president and film producer of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, a nonprofit Christian organization whose mission is to educate Christians about their biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and defend the state of Israel against the rise of global genocidal anti-Semitism. We accomplish our mission by producing award-winning documentaries and programs to educate Christians and mobilize them to action. So why did a housewife and mother of five decide to take on the world's oldest hatred? Well, for me and for many of us, 9/11 was a wake-up call. On that day, we all became Israelis. We were literally shocked and awed into the world of terrorism and the suicide bomber, a world where anti-Semitism still grows like a cancer that is now consuming this very opera house. There's not a single person here today who needs a lecture on the evils of anti-Semitism. It has become an ongoing and evolving war against the Jews and Israel. After Israel's founding, this war was conventional in nature, but the use of military force to destroy Israel failed. And so came phase two. Terrorism. Terrorists targeted Israelis both home and abroad, from the massacre of Israeli athletes at Munich to the Second Intifada to the murder of a crippled Jewish man, Leon Klinghoffer. Terrorists and thugs still continue to target Jews across the world, but they have not succeeded in bringing down the Israeli government nor weakening Israeli resolve. But the anti-Semites and Israel haters have not stopped. They merely found a new scheme, a new attack, a new anti-Semitism. Elie Wiesel stated, "This new anti-Semitism is not just anti-Jewish as it was in Nazi Germany. Today, it is anti-Israel and anti-Zionist as well. Its goal is the same: delegitimize Israel's right to her ancient homeland, ultimately to dehumanize the Jews and their right to exist." The battleground is everywhere, but the most far-reaching is the media and the arts. Anti-Semitic artists have taken a page from the masters of Jew hatred and propaganda, Hitler's Nazis. In Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote, "All propaganda must be presented in a popular form." The art of propaganda consists precisely in being able to awaken the imagination of the public through an appeal to their feelings. In finding the appropriate psychological form, they will arrest the attention and appeal to the hearts of the national masses. The Met has taken a page out of Hitler's playbook. Nazi propagandas involve the production of films, books, and art to use their genocidal anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, I say the time for restraint is over. I want to thank you again for your coming out, for being here and being involved in this very important cause to make your voice heard. God bless you, and God bless the state of Israel. Lashana Tova.
She's a great gal. We're not going to blame her for her relationship with the United Nations. Not at all. Okay. Please welcome our heroic mayor, Rudolph Giuliani.
For me, this is a complicated issue. I've been an opera fan for 57 years. Probably been to the Metropolitan Opera 100 times. I own a CD of this opera. I've listened to this opera 4 or 5 times, and I've read its libretto 4 or 5 times, so I am not speaking to you from ignorance. As a story, attempting to account an appalling terrorist murder of a man in a wheelchair who was thrown into the Mediterranean simply because he was Jewish, it's a factually inaccurate and an extraordinarily damaging piece to an appropriate description of this problem. It did great damage to the relationship between Israel and Palestine, and it supports terrorism. As one who had occasion as a United States attorney to investigate Yasser Arafat, I can say with certainty that this murder was a pure act of terror. The Met and those who decide to go see this production have every right to do so, and it would be hypocritical and anti-American for us to interfere with that and to stop that. They have that right. But we also have a right, just as strong and just as compelling, to point out the historical inaccuracy and the historical damage this contributed to. Hundreds of millions of dollars going to Arafat. It also contributed to years and years of pursuing a plan for peace that was never realistic, and it never worked because it was based on a false premise of moral equivalency and a romanticized version of terrorism that has led to a world where terrorism has only become, as we know, sitting here today, years later, this romanticizing of terrorism has only made it a greater and a greater threat. And it has too often been justified as the expression of a legitimate political philosophy. I've been a patron of the Met for many years, and I appreciate its contribution to New York and to the United States. I will continue to be a patron, but with sincere regret over this decision, which I consider to be a grave mistake, one that never should have been made, one that should never be made again. Thank you very much.
I want to introduce you to 2 gentlemen I had the honor to meet while attending the protest. The first is Chaim Silverman, a New York attorney who knew Leon Klinghoffer and his family. Next, you'll meet Eugene Fromm, a singer and cantor who has actually sung opera at the Met. They both expressed their shock and anger at seeing the Metropolitan Opera put on this detestable work.
My name is Hyman Silverglad, and I'm an attorney in New York City. However, I'm here today because the murder of Leon Klinghoffer is personal to me. I knew Leon Klinghoffer and his family. I'm from the East Village in Manhattan, and the Klinghoffer family had a hardware store on the corner of East 2nd Street and Avenue A for many, many years. But the world doesn't know that Leon Klinghoffer was more than just a headline. He was a graduate of Cooper Union in engineering and was an asset to our country because he patented the chicken rotisserie that you see now all over. And as a result of that, the family became quite wealthy and gave up the hardware store on Avenue A. And he and his wife were taking a last kind of honeymoon because Mrs. Klinghoffer was suffering from 4th stage breast cancer, and they thought a romantic voyage would be the best thing for the end of her life. And so that is the real story of Leon Klinghoffer, and this opera diminishes what happened to this man, and I repeat, an asset to our country and an inventor. What it is doing, it is making murderers into people that we should sympathize with. And that, to me, is such a slap in the face of Leon Klinghoffer and our country. And it has nothing to do with Israel. Leon Klinghoffer, when he took this voyage, didn't have Israel in his head. He had in mind seeing a part of the world. So that's my view about Leon Klinghoffer.
Thank you.
My name is Eugene Flam. I'm a singer. They call me a cantor, a chazan, because I do that too. And I've sung with the Metropolitan Opera Studio, and I've sung on television. I've been with many opera companies, and I teach singing. And as a cantor, I can't help but participate here. And what I'd like to say is that I have nothing against the Metropolitan Opera. In fact, the opera tonight in the opening, Marriage of Figaro. I have sung all the low roles, Figaro, the Count, Antonio, the Gardener, and Bartolo, which is not my role, but they called me in. What I want to say about this is the ultra-liberal people, well-meaning, are going to say that there's room for difference of opinion, and they are feeling sorry for what they consider the underdog. And what the real point of the matter is that with very good intentions, you cannot impose our Western civilization development from the Bible to Christianity to democracy to the Constitution of the United States on people who are still in the 7th century, fighting each other, hating us, and we want to sit down with them and say, listen, let's be friends. It doesn't work. I've known that. I was in the Second World War. I hope I don't look it. But I was there in Europe, and I know about the Holocaust, and I ended up as a newspaper in the Army. I was 19 years old, and I covered a war trial. But I understood then what about Holocaust and about hatred, and it's unbelievable.
Are you Jewish or Christian?
I'm Jewish, and I was a cantor, and I'm also very universal. I've sung in churches. I was the cantor of the Actors Temple when we did ecumenical services with the Actors churches, and the minister of the Actors Church took me to England. I sang at the Old Vic in England, and it was a mixed marriage of the Jewish stage manager, and she said to me, don't worry, I won't mention JC and the Spook. She was a very sophisticated woman. And the bride came over to me afterwards and said, you know, I sing too. And I said, well, honey, I teach singing. I'll give you a gift of a lesson when you come to New York. Just look me up, no charge. Turned out she was the lead in Cabaret on Broadway. That's it. Anyhow, so I came here to participate. I asked the person who told me about it, put me on, I'll be on, and here I am on. But
excellent.
I just thought I should come.
Well, thank you for coming. God bless you.
Well, that's our show for today, and I hope you realize that the time for each of us to stand up is now. Be a leader in your community and in your church. One person can make a difference. Get involved with and support pro-Israel organizations such as PJTN. Call your elected officials. Let your leaders hear from you. Visit our website to learn more. Sign up to receive free newsletters, action alerts, daily blogs, and order our films to share with family and friends. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren and all Israel. We'll see you next time on Focus on Israel.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, P.O. Box 682711, Franklin, Tennessee 37068. You can also support PJTN online. Visit pjtn.org or call 1-877-873-9020.
Anti-Semitism has reached epic proportions, and Israel is now surrounded by nations who seek its destruction. For Israel to lose just one battle would mean losing everything. As Christians, it is our biblical responsibility to stand with our Jewish brethren and Israel. PJTN needs your help to reach more Christians with this urgent message. Please visit our website to become a member today and order our award-winning documentaries. You must decide that you won't be silent. Sign up now at pjtn.org. God bless you, and thank you for your support and prayers.
Focus on Israel is now available on DVD. Each program DVD contains a wealth of bonus materials, including the premier program that started it all, Focus on Israel, program number 1. Also, bonus interview cuts with experts in their respective fields. Informational videos from PJTN documentaries, including Israel Indivisible, The Case for the Ancient Homeland. Lest we forget 9/11 and the rise of Islam. The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust. Disinformation, the secret strategy to destroy the West. Plus the award-winning music video, The Forgotten People. Focus on Israel program DVDs, great educational tools to combat anti-Semitism. Arm yourself and order today. Please go online to pjtn.org. To order, just click on the Store tab. Thanks and blessings from Focus on Israel.